If you're not getting every single punctuation question right on the SAT, you're probably missing this one skill. And in this video, I'm going to tell you what that skill is. I'm going to show you exactly how to master it and be an absolute menace with it. And then I'm going to show you how to apply it to actual SAT questions. So if you've been like watching a bunch of content or trying to figure out how to improve your punctuation question accuracy, and you're struggling to do that, you're still getting questions wrong, watch this video. I really think it's going to be helpful to you. So before we get into it, I want to motivate this a little bit more. I go through each of the types of punctuation, and you see like a colon. How does a colon get used? You have to have an independent clause before and then an explanation after it. For example, she had only one goal. What is that one goal? To eat as many strawberries as possible. So it's an explanation of the independent clause. So she had only one goal. What is that one goal? Here we explain it. And that's exactly how a colon gets used. It separates an independent clause, an independent thought, with an explanation. Period. Independent clause before, independent clause after. I like strawberries, period. I also like pie. Two independent thoughts separated by a period, and so on. The main idea that I want you to take away from this is that, yeah, you can memorize all these rules, and it's pretty easy because there's only like a handful of punctuation and there's only a couple ways that they get used. So it's relatively easy to memorize all of these rules. But the thing that a lot of you might think you can do but actually can't in practice is identify what is an independent clause versus a dependent clause. And that is the skill that underlies all of these punctuation problems. So that's what we're going to work on today. Okay, so here we go. Basically, I just copied and pasted the first 20 examples that are from that worksheet. By the way, this worksheet is free, downloadable. I'll link it in the description so you could get access to it. So here are like the main rules of an independent clause. And this you might have seen before, but I think watching me go through a bunch of examples is going to be more helpful to you than just knowing these rules. So every independent clause has to have a subject and a main verb. So when I work with my students and I ask like, is that an independent clause or not? If they say yes, my follow-up question every single time is, okay, what's the subject and main verb? Because you need to prove to me that it's actually an independent clause. The second thing is you can't start the sentence with a dependent clause starter. And we'll see an example of that really quickly. So this first example, we're just trying to identify if something is an independent clause or a dependent clause and why. So this first one says, although the archaeological evidence suggests otherwise. Now, on instincts, that might sound like a full sentence to you, or it might not sound like a full sentence. And if you're a native English speaker, probably it's a little easier to say that that doesn't sound like an independent clause. That doesn't sound complete. And the reason is because of this word, although. This is a dependent clause starter. It leaves you hanging. So it's kind of like, although this thing happened, you expect some kind of follow-up at the end. So that's what a dependent clause starter is. It's a word that you, or a short phrase that you put at the beginning of the sentence that kind of indicates that there's gonna be more coming at the end of this. I'm just doing a setup. So this is just a setup, but it doesn't give you the payoff. Now, funnily enough, and this is true a lot, if you cross out this dependent clause starter, now this is an independent clause. And the subject is the archaeological evidence. That's what we're talking about. And the thing it's doing, the main verb, is suggests. So if you get rid of the dependent clause starter, it actually becomes an independent clause. But with it there, it's not an independent clause. So this one is not independent, and it's because of the word although. Okay, let's try another one. The committee will reconvene after the holiday recess. So take a minute to think on your own, whether it's independent or dependent. If it's independent, try to think about what the subject and main verb are. It's really helpful. And it is independent. The committee is our subject, and you could either say will is the main verb, or will reconvene. I would accept either of those answers. Another one. And by the way, I think the best way to improve at this is just to try to do this along with me. And I know right now this might be a little bit fuzzy, but by the time we get to like 15 through 20, you're going to be a master at this. Whenever artificial intelligence surpasses human capacity in creative endeavors. So this one kind of leaves you hanging also, and it's because of this word whenever. Dependent clause starter. When you start something with whenever, we're expecting something to come at the end. And again, if you cross out the word whenever, now it's independent. Artificial intelligence is our subject. Surpasses is the main verb. So this is not independent. 4. Scientists have documented the phenomenon across multiple ecosystems. This one is independent. Scientists is the subject, and have documented is the main verb. So in practice, when I'm looking at a question on the SAT and I'm trying to figure out, can I put a period here? I need to know, do I have an independent clause before? Do I have an independent clause after? As soon as I see scientists have documented, I'm good to go. I know I have an independent clause. I actually don't even need to read the rest of this because I've already identified my subject and main verb, and I know that I'm not starting with a dependent clause starter. So actually, the rest of this sentence doesn't really have any bearing on whether this is independent or not. Okay, a little more complicated now. Because the manuscript, which had been hidden in the monastery's archives for centuries, contained revolutionary theories about planetary motion. Think about this one for a second. In this case, the commas are being used to separate out unnecessary additional info. Best practice when you have commas separating unnecessary additional info is to basically cross it out and try reading the sentence without that information. It's unnecessary for a reason. We can read it without it. Because the manuscript contained revolutionary theories about planetary motion, again, this one leaves you hanging. The word because, dependent clause starter. I would not recommend trying to memorize a list of dependent clause starters because there's honestly so many of them. And these ones, I actually believe you know it when you hear it, especially if you're a native English speaker. When you hear because the manuscript contained revolutionary theories about planetary motion, that phrase leaves you hanging. It's like, okay, what? Like, because the manuscript contained revolutionary theories about planetary motion, comma, ... Like, we need to say something else at the end of this. Hopefully you feel that in your gut, like instinctually, you just need more. Okay, this one's very simple. The CEO resigned. Yeah, the CEO is the subject, resigned is the main verb. That one's good to go. Unless the federal government intervenes with substantial regulatory reform. Dependent clause starter again. Unless is a dependent clause starter. And the federal government intervenes would be our subject and main verb. The federal government's the subject, intervenes would be the main verb, but it gets nullified by the dependent clause starter. So if you're starting with a dependent clause starter, the only way that you could still have an independent clause is if you have a comma and then you say something else at the end. And the something else at the end is going to have your subject and main verb. We'll see some examples of this. While some economists advocate for aggressive monetary policy during recessions, others prefer fiscal stimulus. Wow, right on cue. While is a dependent clause starter, so this whole first phrase until the comma is dependent. The while does that to everything after it until the comma. So if we got rid of while, then some economists would be the subject and advocate would be the main verb, and we would have an independent clause there. But because we put the word while before it, it undoes the independence of this first clause. Ooh, hello, cat. I'm cat sitting right now. But, comma, others prefer fiscal stimulus. That phrase alone stands on its own. Others is the subject and prefer is the main verb. So we still have an independent clause. Overall, 8 is independent. Hopefully you see that. By the way, this is a very, very common structure that you see on the SAT where you have a dependent clause starter, but then at the end it pays off. You have an independent clause because of the end of the sentence, the stuff after the comma. Number 9. That the experiment yielded inconclusive results despite the researchers' meticulous methodology. This one, okay, starting with that is confusing to a lot of students. Think about this for a second. That the experiment yielded inconclusive results. So this is actually like a thing. That the experiment yielded inconclusive results. This is kind of like this can be rephrased as like this idea or this result. So this is actually a subject. This whole red underlined thing is a subject. The problem is there's no main verb here. We're still just talking about the subject, but it's not doing anything. The subject, if we rephrase this to this idea, despite the researcher's meticulous methodology, it hasn't done anything. Nothing is happening here. So this has a subject, but it's missing a main verb. We're going to see a counterexample later that will hopefully clarify how sentences with the word that work. Actually, I'll skip ahead to it because I wrote it in for number 20. Okay, that fish are invertebrate was discovered recently. So this can be like rephrased as this idea, or this idea that fish are invertebrate was discovered recently. This idea is our subject, was is the main verb. So this is actually an independent clause. This doesn't come up a ton on the SAT, but it's worth knowing that just because a sentence starts with the word that, it doesn't make it dependent. That is not a dependent clause starter. That fish are invertebrate is a subject. It is an idea. Subjects do not have to be physical things. They don't have to be like people or physical objects. They could be ideas. That's an important distinction to make. Maritime trade routes facilitated cultural exchange. At this point, we should be mastering this. Maritime trade routes is the subject. Facilitated is the main verb. We're good to go. Since nobody, okay, already, since this feels like a dependent clause starter. Since this happened, you can't just end there. You have to put a comma. Something else happened. Since nobody could have predicted, and by the way, the fact that I don't see a comma anywhere in here tells me that we're probably not going to have an independent clause because we're starting with a dependent clause starter and there's no comma. So we're probably just screwed from the get-go. Since nobody could have predicted the magnitude of the technological disruption that would fundamentally reshape the global economy, that's a lot of words, but it's not an independent clause because it starts with a dependent clause starter and there's no payoff. If we start with a dependent clause starter, we need to have a comma and an independent clause after, a la number 8. Starts with the word while, but then we have a comma and we have an independent clause made up by others prefer. That is our subject and main verb. Here we don't have that. No comma, no subject or main verb. If we got rid of the word since, we would probably have an independent clause. Yeah, nobody could have. Nobody is the subject. Could have would be the main verb. But all of that is nullified by the word since, which is a dependent clause starter. One of many that, again, I do not recommend memorizing. The theorem holds true. Is that an independent clause? Absolutely it is. The theorem subject holds true is the main verb. That's what the theorem is doing. Unless the orchestra, comma, whose conductor had unexpectedly resigned amid controversy and whose funding had been slashed by municipal budget cuts, another comma. Okay, so that's a lot of unnecessary additional info that we could cross out. So really the whole sentence boils down to, unless the orchestra could recruit new benefactors, we have a problem. Unless dependent clause starter and there's no payoff. Again, this one's confusing because it looks like there's a comma, so maybe there's a payoff, but this is we have a comma pair. It's a comma sandwich. So all of this stuff in the middle of the sentence can basically be cut out of the sentence. That's what that's saying. When you have a comma sandwich, it's saying we have information here that is unnecessary that we could just chop out and throw in the garbage. So try reading the sentence without that. Grammatically, it's the same. Unless the orchestra could recruit new benefactors. Is that independent? Absolutely not. We need more at the end. unless it's a dependent clause starter, and there's no payoff. This is just one phrase. Unless the orchestra could recruit new benefactors, we would need comma. They're gonna go out of business, or they're not going to be able to fund their bass player or something. So this is a no-go. Even though critics initially dismissed the novel as derivative, even though, that also sounds like a dependent clause starter. It's almost like these come up all the time. Although I did write these with the help of AI. It eventually won international acclaim and influenced countless writers. So we start with a dependent clause starter. That's fine because we have a comma and then we have a payoff. It is our subject. Eventually won, or really the word won is like the verb. Eventually is not really a verb. Won international acclaim and influenced countless writers. So this is an independent clause. The subject is technically the word it. Now, if you want to say that the subject is the novel, I would accept that because it refers to the novel. This is actually the subject. The word it is kind of like filling the place of the subject, but it is referring to the novel. Hopefully that's clear. Also, the SAT never actually tests you on what the subject and main verb is, but you do need to know if a clause is independent or dependent in order to answer questions correctly on the SAT. The whole notion of like trying to understand what the subject and main verb is more just to gain mastery of this skill. It's not literally a skill that's going to be tested. So it's okay if you want to debate with me about what the actual subject and main verb are, as long as you're able to correctly identify. I didn't realize it's like going back and forth. Yes, no, yes, no. As long as you're able to correctly identify which clauses are independent and which ones are dependent, you're going to be great. Historians debate the causes. Subject, main verb. We're good to go. Although the senator, although dependent clause starter, the senator, okay, I see a comma sandwich, comma, comma. So I could probably cross all that out and not even bother reading it. Although the senator announced her retirement last month, very similar to number 13. Unless the orchestra, bunch of unnecessary info, could recruit new benefactors, no payoff. Although the senator, bunch of unnecessary info, announced her retirement last month, no payoff. No good. In order to make this good, we would need another comma and a payoff with a subject and main verb in it. The ambassador delivered her speech. Very simple, very nice. Subject, main verb. Good to go. By the way, in general, you've probably seen this. Verbs, I'll type this out real quick. How do I do this? Add text box. Oh, wow, it's tiny. Paragraph text. Okay. Couple of rules that I don't feel like these are super important, but main verb rules, it's worth knowing. Cannot end with ing, cannot be to blank or having blank. So if you say like she wants to run, so we're using to, she wants to run, that is an independent clause, but the word run is not the main verb. Wants would be the main verb. So I'll just write that out. She wants to run. This is independent, but it's because she is the subject and wants is the main verb. To run is not the main verb, or run is not the main verb because it's introduced by the word to. Also, like she is going out. Here, this would be the subject. Is would be the main verb, not the word going because it ends in ing. Yeah, again, this is not like super, super important, but it could help. There are certain questions that it helps to know this information. Okay, anyway, back to the main show. We're almost done. 18. As long as corporations continue prioritizing short-term profits over sustainable environmental practices, how does this one feel to you guys? As long as, that feels like a dependent clause starter. I'm waiting for a payoff here. As long as they do this, expect bad results, something like that. So this is a no-go. When the hurricane, one of the most powerful storms ever recorded in the Atlantic Basin. Notice the comma sandwich. So we can cross all that out. When the hurricane made landfall near the densely populated coastal city, no payoff. The word when also can be a dependent clause starter. When the hurricane made landfall near the densely populated coastal city. That's not independent. That doesn't stand on its own. We're waiting for a payoff. Just like with the word although. Although the senator announced her retirement last month, we're waiting for the payoff. Okay, last step in all this is going to Pattern SAT, which is also a free tool that you guys can use. PatternSAT.com. You create a login. I don't bombard you with emails. And I gave myself a little quiz. So let's see how we can use these skills to our advantage. When I look at the answer choices here, I'm already noticing a couple things. One, A and B use a semicolon and a period respectively. Those two things basically act in the same way. Like a period separates two independent clauses, a semicolon also does. The only exception is a semicolon list, which is the most complicated rule in punctuation on the SAT, but it's also very rare. So in 99% of cases, A and B would be the same answer, which means they both have to be wrong. Because if one of them's right, the other one would have to be right. So it's just like a little outside thing. Recently unearthed Neronian tools in France dating to 54,000 years ago and attributed to Homo sapiens. By the way, all of that is subject. May provide evidence. That's the main verb, may. So we already have an independent clause. That interactions between Neanderthals and modern humans occurred 10,000 years earlier than was previously supposed. Now, the question is, do we have an independent clause after or not? We probably don't. A finding that, if true, would overturn current theories about Homo sapiens migration during the upper Paleolithic. A finding that would overturn, it's talking about the subject, but it's not giving another main verb. A finding that would overturn current theories. This is all subject, actually. A finding that would overturn current theories about Homo sapiens migration. This is all just describing a finding. The word would is still just talking about the finding. It's not what the finding is doing. A finding that would overturn, that if true would overturn. Yeah, this doesn't stand on its own. A finding that if true would overturn current theories about Homo sapiens migration during the other Paleolithic. So basically we have an independent clause and then a dependent clause afterwards, and we're going to separate that with a comma. So the answer is going to be choice D. Nailed it. Okay, I see a period. This is the only one that implies two independent clauses. All the other choices do not imply that. And by the way, when I read this, I'm going to start with the word the over here because I see that I have a full sentence up here. And these punctuation problems are only testing punctuation. You only need to read the sentence in question with the blank. The chemical the chemical TMAO, which is the subject, counters this effect. Main verb counters this effect, comma. So this is going to introduce some unnecessary additional info. The chemical TMAO counters this effect, ensuring that proteins retain their original configurations. Okay, that's an independent clause right there. I could put a period there if I can show that the next part is also independent. TMAO is found in high concentrations. Absolutely. TMAO subject is the main verb, which means A totally works. I have two independent clauses. TMAO counters this effect is my first, and then TMAO is found is my second independent clause. Okay. He was, so notice I'm skimming the first sentence. He was instrumental in organizing the Pueblo Revolt of 1960. 1680. I'm a little bit under the weather. He was, that's already an independent clause. So I could already put a period here. I don't have any periods, but I do have a comma fanboys, which acts like a period. So choice D is basically a period. And as a result of his leadership, that's a dependent clause starter, comma, the Spanish colonizers were expelled. Look, subject, were is the main verb. The Spanish colonizers were. So even though I have a dependent clause starter here, as a result of his leadership, I still have an independent clause. So I have two independent clauses. He was is my first one, and then the Spanish colonizers were is my second one. Whenever I have two independent clauses, I need to separate it with something like a period, which means either a period, a semicolon, or a comma fanboys. Here I have a comma fanboys, so D is the right answer. In 1955, this is a dependent clause starter. Indian Bengali filmmaker Satyajit Ray, okay, that's my subject, released his first movie. What was he doing? He released something. That's my main verb. Padar Pachali. So I could put a period here because I have an independent clause. Indian Bengali filmmaker Satyajit Ray released his first movie. It's all right here. Now the question is, do I have another independent clause afterwards? So let's go with D for a second and see if it works. So I have an independent clause before. Now, a quiet black and white drama about a family in rural India. That's all kind of dependent stuff because we're describing something that we have not yet introduced. Like, what are we talking about when we talk about a quiet black and white drama about a family in rural India? Comma, Ray's film was quite different. Ooh, here we go. Ray's film, subject, was quite different. Main verb, was. So we do have two independent clauses. Indian Bengali filmmaker Satyajit Ray released, that's subject, main verb. And then we have Ray's film was quite different. Second, subject and main verb, independent clause. The only choice that gives us two independent clauses is choice D. By the way, you notice that when there's a bunch of choices and only one of them implies two independent clauses, that's usually the right answer. I talk about this in my hierarchy of answer choices with punctuation questions, which I think is also in my grammar guide, but I don't remember. Okay, cool. Nailed it. With some 16,000 in attendance, okay, that's just like kind of introductory rambling. Because we're describing something that we haven't yet introduced. This is really relevant when it comes to dangling modifier questions. Like we're introducing some little like factoid, but we haven't said what it's about yet. But then we have a comma and immediately we say what we're talking about. The Second World Black and African Festival of Arts and Culture. Okay, with some 16,000 in attendance, the second, this festival of arts and culture, or Festac 77, as the event was more commonly known. Ooh, so we have a dash here, and this seems like we're just giving it another name. So it's either called the Second World Black and African Festival of Arts and Culture, or Festac, as the event was more commonly known, became the largest. When we have a dash here, usually it's a dash sandwich. So B is going to be the choice. Dash sandwiches work like comma sandwiches. They separate out unnecessary additional info. Here we're just giving like another name for the same thing. So this is like very clearly unnecessary. Like we don't need to say that it was also called Festac 77. So B is the right answer. And here independent clauses didn't really come into the fray as much. This was just like kind of a pattern recognition. When you see one dash, look for another one. Okay, we've got a lot of words, but we could start with scientists. Scientists had previously thought the sun to be in a relatively quiet phase at that time. That's independent because we had scientists, subject, had is the main verb. Scientists had previously thought, so we have an independent clause in a relatively quiet phase at that time. So that's independent. But do we have another independent thought afterwards. The Lunds team's finding suggests otherwise. Yeah. Okay, the finding is the subject and it suggests. What is it doing? It's suggesting something. So that's another independent clause. Which of these choices can separate two independent clauses? I'll let you think about it for a second. It is choice B, comma, but, comma, fanboys. That's the only one that does that. The other ones all would only work if we only had one independent clause. They don't, this and this and this do not connect to independent clauses. Absolutely not. Are you guys having as much fun as I am? Ooh, look at this. I know we don't have to read the first sentence because we only have to read the one with the blank, but notice the dash sandwich that we were just talking about. Okay, jetties can sometimes have the opposite effect, though. Ooh, tricky. So A and C both have semicolons, which imply two independent clauses. The question is, should the though be part of the first sentence or the second sentence? Or the first independent clause or the second one? Or do we not have two independent clauses at all, in which case B or D would be the right answer? Okay, let's first see how many independent clauses we have, and then try to figure out where the word though belongs if we have two. Jetties can sometimes have the opposite effect. Okay, that stands on its own. Jetties, subject, can, main verb. Obstructing the natural flow of sand along the shore can lead to increased erosion in some areas. So yeah, this is the subject, obstructing the natural flow of sand along the shore. So doing this action, this, again, when I say that, I'm saying that you could rephrase this whole thing as doing this. This can lead to increased erosion. So I know that this is a subject because I could summarize it by saying this or that. And whenever you could do that, that's how you know you have a real subject. Can lead to increased erosion. So now, if we put the word though as part of that second sentence, it would actually create a problem because though would be a dependent clause starter. So we would be saying, though obstructing the natural flow of sand along the shore can lead to increased erosion in some areas, now I need a payoff because now I've started it with a dependent clause starter and it doesn't work anymore. So the though has to be part of the first independent clause. Jetties can sometimes have the opposite effect though. End of thought. Obstructing the natural flow of sand along the shore can lead to increased erosion in some areas. So the answer has to be A and not C, because if we put the word though with the second sentence, the second independent clause, you know what I mean? Then it creates a dependent clause starter, which we don't have a payoff for. Does that make sense? If that makes sense, then you're really getting the hang of this, because I don't know how well I explain that, but this is one of the harder concepts to grasp. Yes. Okay, last one. Again, skip the first sentence. Scott Heron himself resisted the Godfather nickname. Again, this is very similar to the last one. So the question is, do we have two independent clauses? And if so, does the word however belong in the first one or the second one? Scott Heron himself resisted the Godfather nickname. That's an independent clause. Also, if we end it with however, that's also an independent clause. Scott Heron himself resisted the Godfather nickname, however. Okay, now let's read the second part and see if it needs or doesn't need the word however. Feeling that it didn't encapsulate his devotion to broader African American blues music tradition as well as bluesologist, the moniker he preferred. That doesn't really make sense. Feeling that it didn't encapsulate his devotion to the broader African American blues music tradition as well as bluesologist. Who's feeling? However, let's read it with however and see if that makes sense. I'm actually thinking maybe we don't even have two independent clauses. Like this is definitely independent. Scott Heron himself resisted the Godfather nickname. However, feeling that it didn't encapsulate his devotion to the broader African American blues tradition as well as bluesologist, the moniker he preferred. I think we only have one independent clause here. I'm not seeing a subject and main verb in the second section. So I'm thinking it's actually just going to be choice C. And one little thing to know, whenever you have a transition word like a however, it needs to be surrounded by punctuation. So A is automatically out because we do have a comma before it, but we have nothing after it. So A cannot be right. I'm thinking it's C. Yeah, cool. Okay. Hopefully this video was super helpful. If it was, like and subscribe. I'm going to be posting more frequently. I was just on vacation for a few weeks. That's why I haven't posted in a minute. But yeah, hopefully this was really helpful for you. And if it was, comment below and tell me like if any of the examples that we did earlier were confusing to you or any of these problems were confusing, and I'll try to give a better explanation in the comments.